work is not mine. I'm not allowed to say whose it is because they want to take another. Um, as always, please send any requests, comments, questions, insults to me via this channel or via the Facebook feed or via YouTube that you come up with. I will be sure to mention them because you will literally be the only person commenting, so why not? I'm also still selling my books. This is an example of my most recent novel, Job Herself, which is a revenge fantasy set in space, so yay for revenge. Let's begin. So, there is the theory that the aliens control the Earth. This is tied into the ancient aliens theory and general conspiracy theories of the sort, such as those with the Illuminati, the Masons, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which we will actually get into in this video a little bit. And the Catholic Church, you know, the new secular order, which is on the dollar, which is New Order of the World, is actually what it means, and so on. The Bilderberg Group, the Communist Conspiracy, the Scientologists, the Mormons, and I can keep on going on and on and on and on. The British Crown. Okay, I'll stop. But these also, these conspiracies have one underlying organizing element, which is someone out there is controlling the world and they're evil. And we have to stop them or at least resist them, if stopping them is not possible. No world-spanning conspiracy can ever be for good, despite the fact that a large number of those organizations are fundamentally providing goods and services to people who wouldn't otherwise have access to them, and to people who are disenfranchised, and provide aid and comfort to refugees and so on. But hey, we'll ignore that and just say they're doing all this for evil. It's the Bill Gates is microchipping us through our vaccines sort of nonsense. The Bill Gates is microchipping us through our vaccines nonsense is just one of the more recent iterations. I'm surprised no one's called him a alien of certain sorts, but they have called him the alien which I think we're going to discuss first, which is a reptilian or reptoid, as the raving loony football announcer, but soccer announcer David Icke has proclaimed that everybody he doesn't like is somehow a reptilian, shape-shifting, or not shape-shifting. It's confusing because some of the times they're talking about these reptilians are 9 feet tall and they shift into human size, or these reptilian aliens are 9 feet tall and they just have really advanced disguise cloaking devices which make them seem and operate in all ways like a human. So, frankly, shape-shifting and losing mass is much more realistic than the cloaking device, and both of those things are impossible. Anyways, so these reptilian aliens are running things. They're all tied to the British monarchy and certain ethnic groups. I'm sure you can guess which ones. And obviously, anybody who's in a position of power, especially like in the Vatican, the American presidency, Bill and Melinda Gates, just anybody who he doesn't like, who's running the world, is a reptoid, a reptilian alien. You see buy-in from Looney Tunes people like Alex Jones, which are, you know, fun in and of themselves. If you do what Alex Jones told you to do and not take him seriously and recognize he's playing a character, although I don't think he's playing as much of a character as he wants us to believe. I mean, he's playing a character for legal purposes only. So, anyways, the Reptoids supposedly were either come here from the Draconis constellation, which because they're dragons, see, or lizard people, and that's what Draconis is referring to, ignoring the fact that that's related to a specific way that that group of stars, which are disparate in time and space, looked for a few centuries to the ancient Greeks, and and has no relation to actual reptilians. But hey, this is a level of intelligence we're dealing with. Astrology, writs even dumber. So, the Reptoids come from the Draconis system, or alternatively, they're lizard people who evolved with the dinosaurs but they're cold-blooded for some reason, or they're warm-blooded. Depends on when you ask David Icke or any of the proponents of this theory, that traveled away from Earth and are coming back to control us, or always lived here on the inner Earth, or again, depends on when you ask and what they're trying to sell you at that point in time. And they are trying to sell you something. David Icke has published more than a dozen books, all of which most of the proceeds go to him. He's the publisher as well. And he's doing quite well for himself, especially once he proclaimed himself to be an incarnation of the godhood. So, yay for you, David. You're God, I think. It's a pity God had to pick a third-rate football announcer with a washed-up career, but, I mean, otherwise who'd sell you your essential oils and other gewgaws that do absolutely nothing? And by the way, like Alex Jones and Gwyneth Paltrow, his little cult sells you all these things too. So, where did the Reptoids come from as a concept? Well, the immediate source is from Robert Howard's Conan series. And there was the Conan series was a series of short stories and novellas. The way science fiction was written back then, it was written for magazine distribution, so you wouldn't have like full-length novels being published. Actually, that didn't start happening in science fiction except with exceptional works until the mid to late 50s. Most of them were like what is called fix-ups, where you compiled a bunch of stories together and made it into a novel. Foundation. Asimov is great for this. His early work as Foundation series, the Robot series, both show. iRobot doesn't even pretend it's an actual novel. So now, this Conan story appeared, I think, in the mid to late 20s. And there's a guy named Clark Ashley Smith. I have a lot of his work right here. Basically worked with Howard and Lovecraft and made the not racist version of Lovecraft, which is much better written and someone who's actually evil trying to convince you that everything is horrible. Actually evil. Tells the Nazis that they're not doing enough with the Jewish problem, which he did in 1938, is actively evil, I would contend. So, people like Clark Ashton Smith, excellent writer, highly recommend him. He was recommended to me by another excellent author, Tim Powers. Go read his my favorite, but other people. Reptoids kind of picked up steam. They appear in things like Dungeons and Dragons pretty early on. Both as lizard folk and Yuan-ti, and the idea of lizard people kind of goes back through folklore, but it's really not as prominent as you would think. It would be. I mean, you see it occasionally, but it's not a universal sort of thing like elves, although they're not usually called elves, or ogres, or, the Great Flood. So, uh, it seems that he picked up the other thing that's really interesting from the stuff that Madame Blavatsky of the Theosophists, who I talked about in the last couple of videos, was publishing. And she contended that these people ruled the earth at some point in the past. We'll actually get back to her later on. So that actually provides an entrance in both directions. Way and scientific, if you consider Weird Tales, which is literally the name of the magazine a lot of these things were published in, and an accurately named one at that. If you consider Weird Tales to be a source. So it's just as valid as Blavatsky's spiritualism. So these combine, and all of a sudden, everyone that Ike doesn't like is a Reptoid. And now I mention him specifically because this off into public perception. This is, but in the Western world, especially the developed Western world, a lot of this myth is Ike conglomerating other things. Just like the Sadhguru of the Isha cult takes from everywhere and claims it as his own, not even bothering to change the wording, which is what really irks me. Because, I mean, it's okay to cite someone. You don't have to pretend that you're Socrates. Local judges. Not allegedly, because there's been plenty of investigation on that. So this rebranding of a bunch of different ideas into one coherent conspiracy is actually common amongst these sorts of conspiracies. And if you look at the individual pieces, they may hold up to some extent or other, because most conspiracies have a grain of truth in them. I mean, not reptilians, but, the Vatican controls of adherence. The Queen of England, while her temporal power has waned, she's a figurehead leader for another few billion people. I mean, admittedly, I don't think many people in Pakistan really care what she wants from them, but, I think they're part of the Commonwealth. I know India is. So, they actually were part of in the British Empire at one point. So, and, I mean, they play cricket, for Christ's sakes. Who plays cricket? Anyways, I mean, I know India, but still. Anyways, the entire... Wait, there's some source to some of this stuff. I mean, American presidents do tend to follow the same policies because of ontological inertia, if not anything else. So there is some element of truth. But then when you look at them together, compare elements from column A to column B, all at the highest, you hope that you're either too want to figure it out or not care, or you don't poke around too deep. So let's get back to Blavatsky. And let's talk... No, actually, let's not. Let's skip that one. We're going to go back to actually probably the most memorable ones. What are called the Greys, which are usually seen as big eyes, small mouths, maybe... And large craniums, small chin, small bodies, etc. Now, these actually persist in folklore for thousands of years because um, because what you see is these sorts of features described at these short, large-eyed, large-headed, slight entities described as elves, fairies, gnomes, dwarves. Oh shoot, I can't remember the Hawaiian name for them, but they're literally global. Okay, um, why this came about? These people, the idea of these people comes about is up for much speculation. One argument is there a kind of vague description of other primates or precursors to humanity, or any number of other things. Other people just say it's kind of like basically if you're trying to describe someone, these are the features that you focus on, and less so on these. And so when you tell a story, that's magnified. So it goes from one end, which is these are kind of tribal memories of, pre-humans, to the other end where it's just like kind of like a psychological focus. I don't know which side is right. There's an immense gamut of stuff in the middle. But those actually have history and folklore. So if there are aliens, the ones that have the most evidence for them are the Greys, because, we have stories of them all over the globe, going back thousands and thousands of years, even in cultures which are more recent, like the Hawaiians, who came from the Tahitians and imported some of this from them. And in the case of the Hawaiians, there's speculation that that's referring to the people who were initially on the Hawaiian Islands prior to the current Tahitian descendant Hawaiians. I don't know if that's true. I mean, that very well could be the case, that this is a reference to a lot of precursor peoples. So, anyways, so the Greys are supposed to be out there helping specific governments as long as those governments do what they want them to do, like give them tech, which we discussed last time, which is not happening. And and they're the ones who crashed their saucer. You actually see a reference to these sorts of things as aliens in the 1800s, late 1800s. A quasi-reference, but a good descriptor could be found in H.G. Wells's Time Machine. At least this is what Wikipedia says, but I mean, upon thinking about it, and I've read the Time Machine too many times to count, it does mirror the description of the Eloi, which are the beautiful descendants of the aristocracy who are completely useless. The being completely useless isn't part of it, but kind of like this is the way humanity kind of tends toward, if it is idyllic, with the Eloi live in an idyllic situation, except for, getting killed to be food for the Morlocks, who are the actual, functioning humans. But hey, they have a nice life right up to that point. I highly recommend reading The Time Machine, even though it is a kind of outdated socialism in the theory in it. It does really, really hold up. So you see that this builds up, and you get, as humanity becomes more and more paranoid over the decades, and this doesn't just start in the 20th century, it goes way back. You see that, first off, elves are never benign fully. They're mischievous. There are elements of chaos, which may be good or may be ill, but not really evil or malicious, more like amoral, or not immoral, but just amoral entities. And that's throughout, if you don't put out the milk for the brownie, they don't fix your shoes, and they start wreaking havoc. So you put out the milk, the brownies help you. If you don't put out the milk, the brownies hurt you. Perfect example. The whole elegant elves that you see in Lord of the Rings and subsequent fantasy works really is derived from the Nordic myth and not general myth. So, I mean, hey, I like playing an elf in D&D. So one of my favorite characters is a half-elf, but that doesn't mean, that that's in any way supported by folklore of my people, at least, or most other people. So the idea that these capricious entities can somehow settle down and create some sort of interaction with governments and religions to force the world to progress in its own way uh, is a disconnect between the past concept of what elves were, but so the Greys, but as the world becomes more and more organized and more codified, the elves / Greys end up following that. Once they represent the capriciousness of nature, now they represent the order of science, and the fear that, in both cases, the justified fear of nature and the less justified fear of science that the common people have. And so they become the new world masters, but behind the scenes, just like the Reptoids are behind the scenes, influencing everything. One fun thing about the Reptoids is supposedly you don't know you're a Reptoid sometimes until you discover you're a Reptoid. Or not, because it just depends on how Ike feels that day. I'm going to get into the last one real quick because I'm running out of time. Or I've ran out of time. The last one I want to discuss goes back to Blavatsky and ties in with the elves of Tolkien, which is the last type of aliens, which are the only ones which are supposed to be benign, are tall, thin, fair, blonde, etc. And those are the ones that are helpful, because all the ones that look like other people, because remember, the other ones are based on they either look like or are actually other people. The what are called Nordic aliens are the ones who are supposed to be helping, and they're extra wise and all the rest. Blavatsky and her followers in the New Age movement contend that these aren't actual aliens. They were the Aryans that were referenced by Blavatsky at the beginning of the cycle of ages, which I mentioned in my last couple of videos. But then they've time traveled to now to bring us into the age of Aquarius. Other people just view them as, like superior forms of humanity, and I don't need to tell you the inherent racism and ethnocentrism of a bunch of people Lovecraft actually would have liked being the only benevolent entities, wholly benevolent entities that are, in fact, aliens, who are trying to take over the world. Everything these guys do is just fine and dandy. So, because they're tall, pale, elegant, Tolkien elves. There's nothing wrong with Tolkien elves, but these guys, they actually crop up mostly in the 50s. As aliens. Prior to that, they're in the New Age movement. Told you it was racist, okay? I told you. Go back and look at what they write. It's racist. And so these people show up, and when the Greys abduct somebody, and probe and test and do all sorts of horrible things. When the Nordics abduct somebody, it's to enlighten them, to give them beauty and intelligence and so on. Expose them to man's higher urges and so on. Unlike the Reptoids, who apparently are just space Jews, which is, again, something that that David Icke has pointed out, and I'm not kidding when I say that that the man is rampagingly anti-Semitic, and bigoted. But just read what he wrote, just like Blavatsky, just like the people who venerate these Nordic aliens. But these guys, the Nordics, are the height of what humanity could be. So they're not signs of fear the way the actual elves, or not that they're real, but actual elves or actual greys are supposed to be, but rather that they are the aspiration. So, anyways, there's so much more to talk about conspiracy groups. Again, as always, right, like the Illuminati and so on, like the imperial conspirators. So, I have to end this about imperial aliens for now because I don't have enough to go on with it. It's overlong, even for me. But please send comments, questions, requests. I want to show you this. If you can find this, this is a great game, and if you love conspiracy theories, buy it. It's amazingly fun. I got this back in the 90s, in the mid 90s, and you can tell by how tight tape it is. But I highly recommend it, and before I leave, I have to remind you, according to my wife, that this is the most recent novel, my most recent anthology, which is a collection of much of authors' short stories about conspiracy theories. It's called Fake News, and you can find it wherever digital books are sold. Feel free to contact me. I hope to talk to you again next week. Good day.